Before we step into tomorrow's silence, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and join thousands who walk these sacred paths with us, because what unfolds in the quietest hours before dawn will remind you why some moments are meant to be witnessed together, and every journey through ancient streets becomes richer when shared with those who seek meaning in the mystery. The air smells of limestone and cardamom when I wake before the city does, when Jerusalem holds its breath between midnight and morning, when the stone streets still remember yesterday's footsteps but have not yet learned tomorrow's. I rise from a narrow bed in a hostel near Jaffa Gate, where the pipes clang and somewhere a cat cries and the night clerk snores behind a desk piled with maps nobody uses anymore. Outside my window the darkness is not complete because this city never surrenders entirely to black. There is always amber from a street lamp bleeding onto ancient walls, always a distant glow from the old city ramparts where floodlights bathe 2,000 years in artificial gold. I pull on worn boots and a jacket that smells of travel, of airports and bus stations and 100 other cities that blur together now, but Jerusalem does not blur. Jerusalem cuts sharp and clean into memory like a name carved in rock. I step into the pre-dawn cold and the narrow alley exhales dampness, the kind that rises from stone older than any living language, and my breath makes white clouds that vanish before they can mean anything. Above me the sky holds that particular darkness that comes just before change, not quite black, not yet blue, a shade without name that exists only in the space between night and revelation. The cobblestones under my feet are uneven and slick with dew, each one placed by hands long turned to dust, each one holding the weight of pilgrims and conquerors and merchants and mourners, and I am just one more walker on stones that do not care who crosses them. Somewhere to my left a door opens and closes quickly, a sliver of warm light and the smell of bread baking, yeast and heat and life continuing in kitchens while the streets dream. I turn toward the kotel, toward the western wall where prayers rise every hour of every day like smoke from an eternal fire, and the lanes grow narrower as I descend into the Jewish quarter, where shuttered shops lean against each other like old friends sleeping upright. The first prayers of morning begin before I reach the wall, voices lifting in Hebrew through windows I cannot see, the ancient cadence of Shasharit threading through the darkness, and I feel the city waking around me in layers, each community stirring at its appointed hour, each faith marking time in its own rhythm. A cat watches me from a doorway with eyes that reflect green in the dimness, unimpressed by pilgrims, unimpressed by dawn, interested only in the possibility of food or warmth or a hand that might pause to offer kindness. I keep walking. The stones grow whiter as I approach the plaza, great limestone blocks laid by Herod's engineers 2 millennia ago, and the wall rises before me out of darkness like something permanent in a world of impermanence, like something that refuses to forget even when forgetting would be easier. Men in black coats and wide-brimmed hats stand swaying before the wall, prayer books cradled in their arms, their voices joining in a murmur that sounds like wind through ancient trees, like water over river stones, like a language older than exile speaking to a God older than names. I stand at the barrier that separates the plaza from the prayer space, not entering because I am here to witness, not to intrude, and the sky above begins its slow transformation from charcoal to ash to something almost pearl. The wall weeps through its cracks, moisture seeping from between stones, as if the rock itself remembers all the tears pressed into it, all the prayers folded into paper and stuffed into its crevices, all the longing of a people who have returned again and again to this place that refuses to release them. Then something shifts. I feel it before I understand it, a change in the air like pressure dropping before a storm, like the moment before lightning writes its name across the sky. The prayers falter, not stopping but hesitating, voices catching mid-word as if every throat suddenly finds itself unable to shape sound. The swaying slows. Heads turn toward the Temple Mount, toward the platform that rises above the wall where the gold of the dome catches the first gray light of morning, and in that turning I see not fear but a kind of arrested wonder, as if the world has held up its hand and asked for silence and no one can refuse. I look up toward the mount and see nothing that should cause this pause, nothing visible, but the silence spreads like water poured across stone, flowing from the plaza up the ramps and steps, flowing through the Mughrabi gate where only Muslims may enter to pray, flowing across the vast esplanade where Al-Aqsa stands in its sacred dignity and the dome rises on its platform like a prayer-made architecture. The call to far has not yet sounded but the air feels full of listening, as if the very stones have bent their attention toward something I cannot name. The men at the wall stand frozen now, their prayer books open but their lips still, and the silence is so complete that I can hear my own heartbeat, can hear the blood moving through my veins, can hear the impossibly quiet sound of dawn arriving. I turn and walk quickly through the Jewish quarter toward the Christian quarter, toward the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where candles burn through every night and pilgrims sleep on marble floors waiting for morning services, and as I walk the silence follows me like a living thing, like a presence that has decided to accompany my steps. Shop shutters remain closed but faces appear at windows, looking out, looking up, looking at each other with questions no one can answer. An old woman in a headscarf stands in a doorway holding a broom, frozen mid-sweep, her eyes on the lightning sky above the rooftops. I nod to her and she nods back slowly, and neither of us speaks because what words would fit this moment, what language could hold this held breath? The lanes twist and climb, and I emerge onto the Via Dolorosa where 14 stations mark a path of suffering, where tourists usually crowd with cameras and guides with flags. But now the street is empty except for a single priest in black walking slowly with his hands clasped behind his back. I approach him and he stops, and his face in the growing light looks carved from the same limestone as the walls around us, weathered and patient and somehow both weary and awake. I ask him if he feels it, this silence, and he smiles faintly and says, "Feel it? My friend, I am drowning in it. I have served in this church for 30 years and I have never heard Jerusalem so quiet. Even the bells have stopped ringing. I went to the tower to check them and they are fine, but when I tried to ring them for lauds my hands would not pull the rope. It was as if the city itself asked me to wait, to listen instead of making sound." We stand together on the ancient stones and the silence presses against us like deep water, and I realize that he is right. There are no bells, no call to prayer, no car horns from beyond the walls, no voices raised in greeting or commerce or argument, nothing but this vast quiet that makes my ears ring with absence. The priest touches my shoulder gently and says, "Whatever is happening, it feels holy." That is the only word I have. Not frightening, though perhaps it should be. Just holy. As if something we have all been waiting for without knowing we waited has come to stand among us and ask us to be still. He continues toward the Holy Sepulchre and I turn upward, climbing toward the Temple Mount platform though I know I cannot enter, climbing because my feet carry me toward the source of the silence the way water seeks its level. The sky has shifted to dove gray now, and the first true colors begin to seep back into the world, the cream and gold and rose of Jerusalem stone, the green of cypress and olive, the deep blue that will soon arrive with full morning. At the top of a narrow stairway I meet a young Muslim woman in a hijab carrying a prayer rug rolled under her arm, and she has stopped on the steps with her hand on the wall as if to steady herself. She looks at me and her eyes are bright with unshed tears and she says in Arabic accented English, "I was going to Al-Aqsa for far. I never miss far. But when I reached the gate I could not go in. Not because anyone stopped me but because I felt, I do not know the word, as if I would be disturbing something sacred. More sacred than usual, I mean. Does that make sense?" I tell her it makes perfect sense, that the whole city seems to be holding its breath, and she nods and says, "My grandmother told me stories about the night of Isra and Miraj, when the Prophet peace be upon him traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem and ascended to heaven from the rock under the dome. She said that night was so holy that even the angels held their breath. I always thought it was just poetry, just a beautiful way to speak about reverence. But this morning I understand. This silence is not absence. It is presence. It is so much presence that there is no room left for ordinary sound." She sits down on the stone steps and unfurls her prayer rug and begins to pray right there on the stairs, her forehead touching the mat, her whispered Arabic the only sound in all the world it seems, and I leave her to her devotion and continue upward until I can see across the rooftops to where the dome of the rock blazes gold against the paling sky, and the silence is so thick now that I feel I could reach out and touch it, could hold it in my hands like something solid. I make my way around the perimeter of the mount, unable to enter but drawn to circle it as if by walking its boundaries I might understand what is happening within them. At the Lion's Gate I find an older man in the traditional dress of an imam, his beard white and his eyes deep-set and calm, standing with his hands resting on the stone parapet looking out over the Kidron Valley toward the Mount of Olives. I stand beside him and we watch the light strengthen over the ancient cemetery that covers the hillside in white stones, thousands upon thousands of graves waiting for resurrection, waiting for the day when the dead rise and the Messiah comes through the golden gate that has been sealed for centuries. After a long time he speaks without looking at me, his voice low and measured. "In my years of service I have seen many things. I have seen politicians use this place for theater. I have seen riots and celebrations and the endless dance of power and grief. But this morning when I came to lead the call for far, when I climbed the minaret and opened my mouth to sing, no sound came. Not because I had lost my voice, but because my voice knew better than to break what was already here. This silence is prayer. It is every prayer ever offered in this city, all at once, held in a single moment. How could I add my small voice to such a symphony? I ask him what he thinks is happening and he shakes his head slowly. I do not presume to know the mind of Allah. But I know what I feel. I feel that we are in the presence of something that does not belong to any one of us, that does not favor one tradition over another, that simply is. Like the sun rises on the righteous and the wicked alike, this moment touches Jew and Christian and Muslim with equal weight. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps we are being reminded that we all stand on the same holy ground, that we all lift our prayers to the same sky, that the one who hears us does not need our divisions to know us. He turns to me finally and his eyes are kind. Walk to the Mount of Olives, friend. Walk to the top and look back at the city. Sometimes we understand things better from a distance. He touches his hand to his heart and then to his forehead in a gesture of blessing and turns back toward the Muslim quarter, moving slowly through the silent streets like a man wading through deep water. I follow his advice and descend through the valley and climb the winding path that leads up the Mount of Olives, passing the Garden of Gethsemane where ancient olive trees twist their silver trunks skyward, where Jesus prayed and wept the night before his death, where the weight of human suffering and divine purpose met in a garden that has outlived empires. The trees stand in their enclosure and they look no different than they do any other morning, gnarled and patient and rooted deep, but in this silence they seem to hold more meaning, as if silence lets us see what noise usually covers, as if stillness reveals what motion hides. The climb is steep and my legs burn and my breath comes hard, and I am grateful for the effort because it gives me something concrete to do in a moment that feels unmoored from ordinary reality. At the summit I turn and face west and Jerusalem spreads below me in the growing light, the city of gold and stone and prayer, the city that has broken more hearts than any other place on earth and healed just as many. From here I can see the Temple Mount laid out like a great stone courtyard lifted above the surrounding quarters, can see the golden dome catching fire as the sun breaches the eastern horizon behind me, can see Al-Aqsa with its silver dome and gray stone dignity, can see the Christian quarter with its domes and bell towers, can see the Jewish quarter rebuilding itself around the wall, can see the Armenian quarter keeping its ancient secrets, can see all of it at once as a whole rather than as fragments, and the sight makes my throat tight with something I cannot name. The city is waking now in the technical sense, lights appearing in windows, smoke rising from early cooking fires, but the silence persists, this impossible quiet that should not exist in a city of nearly 1 million souls. No traffic sounds rise from the streets beyond the old city walls. No airplanes cross the sky. No construction equipment groans and beeps. Just silence, pure and complete and somehow not empty at all but full, overfull, brimming with a presence that makes me want to take off my shoes though I stand on dirt and scrub grass, not sacred ground though perhaps in this moment all ground is sacred, perhaps that is what the silence teaches. I sit on the hillside and watch the sun climb and the light pour down into the city like liquid, filling the valleys and streets and courts with gold, and I think about all the people who have sat on this hill and looked at Jerusalem and wondered at its stubborn refusal to become anything other than what it is, this nexus of longing, this city that means so much to so many that it can barely hold the weight of its own significance. Kings have crowned themselves here and prophets have wept here and armies have broken themselves here and lovers have whispered here and children have been born here and the old have died here, and through it all the stones have absorbed everything, every drop of blood and wine and tears and joy, until the very walls vibrate with history too dense to comprehend. As the sun rises higher the silence begins to ease, not breaking but loosening, like a held breath finally exhaled. I hear the first sounds return, a bird singing tentatively from a cypress tree, a dog barking in the distance, a door closing somewhere in the neighborhoods that sprawl down the hill. And then the call to prayer rises from a minaret, the muezzin's voice finding its confidence again, lifting the ancient words across the waking city, and other voices join from other towers, and the sound weaves through the air like threads of gold through fabric, beautiful and old and as much a part of Jerusalem as the stones themselves. I make my way back down the hill as the city returns to its usual symphony of sound, and by the time I reach the Lion Gate the streets are beginning to fill with people moving toward their day's obligations, their faces still showing traces of whatever they experienced in the silent hours, a kind of soft wonder, a gentleness in their movements as if they are all still half inside a dream. I walk back through the Muslim quarter where shops are opening now, metal shutters rolling up to reveal displays of spices and fabrics and trinkets, and a shopkeeper sees me and calls out, "You felt it too, yes?" The quiet? My wife thought I was crazy when I woke her but she felt it, everyone felt it. I stop at his shop and he pours me a small cup of strong coffee without asking, and I accept it with thanks, and the coffee is bitter and sweet at once and scalds my tongue just enough to remind me I am still in my body, still bound by ordinary physical laws even after a morning that felt like it belonged to some other order of reality. The shopkeeper leans against his doorframe and sips his own coffee and says, My father told me about a morning like this once, long ago when he was a boy. He said the whole city stopped, just stopped, and everyone went outside and stood in the streets looking at each other, and no one knew what to do because the scripts they normally followed did not fit the moment. He said it lasted maybe an hour and then life resumed, but that everyone remembered it, that it became a story they told their children, a story about the morning Jerusalem listened. I asked him what his father thought it meant and he shrugs. He said it meant whatever you needed it to mean. For him it meant that God was near, close enough to silence the noise so we might hear. For others it meant something else. But everyone agreed it was holy, even those who claimed no faith. Some things are undeniable even to the skeptical. Some moments demand reverence whether we are prepared to give it or not. I finish my coffee and thank him and continue through the souk where merchants are arranging their goods, setting out pyramids of fruit, hanging racks of clothing, laying out rugs and jewelry and carved olive wood and 1,000 other things that pilgrims and tourists buy to carry home as proof they were here. The morning light slants through the arched passageways and catches dust motes floating lazy in the air, and the smells of coffee and cardamom and fresh bread mix with older smells of stone and history and incense, and I realize that Jerusalem is returning to itself, to its usual beautiful chaos, but that something has changed, some layer has been added or revealed, some truth has been glimpsed that cannot be unseen even as daily life resumes. I walk to the Christian quarter and enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre through the ancient doorway, climbing down the steps into the dim interior where candles flicker and incense hangs thick and pilgrims press their foreheads to marble slabs and weep for reasons they might not fully understand. The church is a labyrinth of chapels and altars, a place where 6 Christian denominations share space in careful negotiation, where every stone is fought over and cherished, where the holiest site in Christianity sits under a roof that leaks and needs repair but can never quite get it because the communities cannot agree on how to proceed. It is messy and human and beautiful in its imperfection, this place where Christ is said to have died and risen, where the greatest story ever told reaches its climax in stone and shadow. I find a quiet corner near the rotunda and sit on a worn wooden bench and watch the pilgrims come and go, their faces showing every emotion humans are capable of feeling, grief and joy and confusion and hope and despair and ecstasy, all of it compressed into these walls that have seen centuries of seekers come bearing their hearts like offerings. An elderly woman in black sits near me, her rosary moving through her fingers with practiced ease, her lips moving in silent prayer, and when she finishes she looks at me and says in English flavored with a thick Greek accent, "This morning I have prayed for 60 years. Every morning the same prayers. But this morning the words felt new. Like I was saying them for the first time, like they meant something I had never understood before. Do you know what I mean?" I tell her I think I do, that the whole city seems to have experienced something similar, and she nods and pats my hand with her gnarled fingers. This is why we come here, yes? To feel closer to mystery. To stand where holy things happened and hope that some of the holiness rubs off on us. But this morning the holiness came looking for us. We did not have to reach for it. It simply arrived like dawn, inevitable and free. She rises slowly and moves toward the edicule that houses the tomb, joining the line of pilgrims waiting to enter, and I watch her go and feel grateful for her words, for the simple faith that has carried her through 6 decades of morning prayers, for the way she still finds newness in ancient repetitions. This is what Jerusalem does, I think. It takes what is old and makes it feel immediate, urgent, alive. It collapses time so that Abraham's sacrifice and David's conquest and Jesus' resurrection and Muhammad's night journey all exist simultaneously, all press upon the present moment with equal weight, all refuse to become mere history. I leave the church and walk toward Jaffa Gate, and the sun is fully risen now and the city is loud again, vendors calling out their wares, children shouting, cars honking beyond the walls, the ordinary music of human activity filling the air where silence held court just hours ago. But the memory of the silence remains, and I see it in the faces of people I pass, a certain softness, a certain thoughtfulness, as if everyone is moving through the day while still holding something precious from the night, some gift that came unexpected and cannot be explained but also cannot be denied. Near Jaffa Gate I see an older Orthodox rabbi standing with a group of students, young men in black coats and side curls, and he is speaking to them with animated gestures, and I slow my pace to listen as I pass. He is saying, "The Talmud tells us that when the temple stood, the Shekinah, the presence of the divine, dwelt between the cherubim above the Arkansas. But the sages also teach that the Shekinah went into exile with the people, that the divine presence accompanies us in our wanderings. This morning I felt what exile might feel like without the Shekinah, a silence so complete that even prayer hesitated. But I also felt that perhaps the silence itself was the presence, that perhaps we have been making so much noise in our religious practices that we Have forgotten that God also speaks in stillness, that the Almighty who thundered at Sinai also came to Elijah in a still small voice. Sometimes we need to stop talking so we can hear. Sometimes we need to stop even praying so we can learn what prayer is for. His students nod seriously and ask questions I cannot hear, and the rabbi listens and answers with patience. And I move on through the gate and into the modern city beyond the walls where traffic moves and people hurry to work and life continues with its usual indifference to mystery. But even here I see differences, small signs that the silence has reached beyond the old city walls. A woman stands at a bus stop with her eyes closed, her face turned toward the sun, and she is not waiting for a bus. She is just standing, just being, just letting the moment hold her. Two men sit on a bench sharing coffee and they are not speaking, just sitting side by side in companionable quiet. A street musician unpacks his violin but does not play yet. He simply holds the instrument and runs his fingers along the wood as if remembering what music is before he attempts to make it. I walk back toward my hostel and the city unfolds around me in layers of old and new, ancient stones supporting modern apartments, Byzantine churches standing next to glass office buildings, the eternal and the temporary existing side by side the way they always have here, the way they always will. Jerusalem is a city that refuses to choose between past and future, that insists on holding both at once, and perhaps that is why it feels so holy, because holiness exists at the intersection of time and timelessness, in the space where what was and what will be meet in what is. At the hostel the night clerk is still at his desk but he is awake now, sipping tea and reading a newspaper in Hebrew, and when I enter he looks up and says, "You were out walking? You felt it then, the quiet?" I tell him I did and he nods and says, "My grandmother would have said it was the footsteps of Messiah, walking the streets to see if we are ready. My father would have said it was just atmospheric pressure, some weather phenomenon. Me, I do not know what to believe but I know what I felt. I felt that for once, just for 1 hour, Jerusalem stopped arguing with itself. That seems like miracle enough. I go to my room and sit on the narrow bed and write in a journal I carry, trying to capture what happened though I know words will fail, know that some experiences resist translation into language, resist being pinned down like butterflies in a case. The silence was real but also unreal, present but also absent, filled with meaning but refusing to mean any one thing. It was Jewish and Christian and Muslim and none of those and all of those at once. It was ancient and brand new. It was terrifying and comforting. It was a question and an answer and the space between question and answer where real understanding lives. As I write the muezzin calls again for midday prayer and church bells ring and somewhere in the Jewish quarter men gather for mincha, and the sounds layer over each other the way they do every day in Jerusalem, competing and complementing, a cacophony that should be chaos but somehow becomes symphony. This is the miracle of Jerusalem, perhaps, not that it is quiet but that it contains so much sound, so much prayer, so much longing, and that the stones do not crack under the weight of it all. The silence this morning was extraordinary, but the noise that has returned is extraordinary too, this determination to keep praying, keep singing, keep calling out to the divine even though the divine so rarely answers in ways we can understand. I think about the priest who said the silence felt holy, about the imam who said it was every prayer at once, about the young woman on the steps who compared it to the night of the prophet's ascension, about the rabbi teaching his students about the still small voice, about the Greek grandmother finding newness in her ancient prayers, about the shopkeeper's father who remembered another morning like this one. I think about how they all experienced the same event but understood it through their own traditions, their own languages, their own relationship with mystery, and how none of them were wrong because mystery is large enough to hold all interpretations, generous enough to meet each person where they stand. The day continues outside my window and I know that tonight I will walk the streets again, will climb to the Mount of Olives and watch the sun set over the city, will stand at the wall as evening prayers begin, will sit in some cafe and drink bitter coffee and listen to the conversations around me, Hebrew and Arabic and English and Russian and Amharic and Armenian, all the languages of diaspora and return, all the voices of people who have been scattered and gathered, all the stories of loss, and hope that Jerusalem holds in its ancient palm. And tomorrow I will wake before dawn again and walk the empty streets and wonder if the silence will return or if it was a once-in-a-lifetime gift, a glimpse of something we were meant to see just once so we would remember that beneath all the noise and conflict and competing claims, beneath all the politics and pain, there is something else, something deeper, something that does not belong to any one of us but to all of us, or perhaps to none of us, perhaps to the city itself which has been here longer than our religions, longer than our nations, longer than our stories and will be here long after we are gone. As afternoon light fills my small room I feel grateful, though I am not sure what I am grateful for or to whom I am grateful. Grateful for the silence perhaps, or for the breaking of the silence. Grateful for the rabbi and the imam and the priest and the grandmother and the shopkeeper, for their willingness to share their experience, for their openness to mystery even when it disrupts their routines. Grateful for Jerusalem itself, this impossible city that should not exist, that has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that the current city stands on the rubble of previous cities, on layers and layers of human determination to claim this hill as holy, to mark this ground as meaningful, to say that here, in this specific location, earth touches heaven in ways it does not touch anywhere else. And maybe that is what the silence meant, that touching, that thin place where the distance between mundane and sacred collapses, where the ordinary world becomes transparent and we see through it to something else, something that was always there but usually hidden by the static of daily existence. Maybe the silence was not a message but a clearing away of messages, a pause in the conversation so we could remember that communication is not just about speaking but also about listening, that revelation comes not just in thunder and burning bushes but also in stillness, in the empty space between words where meaning lives. I close my journal and lie back on the bed and close my eyes and let the sounds of the city wash over me, the distant honking and calling and praying and living, all of it beautiful in its messy vitality, all of it a kind of prayer even when it does not know it is praying. And I think that maybe this is the lesson of Jerusalem, that prayer is not just what happens in synagogues and mosques and churches, not just what happens when we fold our hands and bow our heads, but what happens when we live fully, when we engage deeply, when we refuse to pretend that life is simple or that faith is easy or that the holy can be contained in a single building or claimed by a single tradition. The afternoon deepens toward evening and shadows stretch long across the limestone walls and the light turns gold and then amber and then rose, and I rise and wash my face and prepare to walk again into the city that has marked me in ways I will spend years understanding. I pull on my jacket and check my pockets for my journal and my water bottle and the few coins I will need for coffee or bread, and I stand at the door of my small room and take a breath and feel a kind of joy rise in my chest, unexpected and pure because I am here, because I witnessed what I witnessed, because the silence came and touched me and left me changed even though I cannot say precisely how. This is what pilgrimage does, I think, as I step into the hallway and descend the narrow stairs. It does not give answers, it gives experiences. It does not solve mysteries, it deepens them. It does not make faith easier, it makes faith necessary, because without faith what else do we have in the face of moments that shatter our categories and defy our explanations? The silence this morning was beyond my ability to comprehend, beyond my ability to control or predict or make sense of in any final way, and that is precisely what made it holy, that it demanded I surrender my need to understand and simply accept that I was in the presence of something larger than my understanding, something that cared nothing for my categories but everything for my openness. I step into the street and the evening call to prayer begins, the first notes rising pure and clear in the cooling air, and I turn my steps toward the old city, toward the wall and the dome and the church and the narrow lanes where so much history is compressed into such small space. And as I walk I feel the city welcoming me back, not because I am special but because Jerusalem welcomes everyone who comes with honest searching, everyone who arrives with questions rather than certainty, everyone who is willing to let the stones speak their ancient truths without trying to force those truths into modern boxes. Tomorrow I will leave Jerusalem and continue my journey to other cities, other countries, other quests for meaning in a world that often feels empty of it. But Jerusalem will stay with me, will haunt my dreams and color my thoughts and remind me always that mystery is real, that silence can speak, that sometimes the most profound experiences are the ones we cannot explain, the ones that resist all our attempts to pin them down and package them and make them safe. The silence this morning was not safe, it was wild and free and utterly beyond human control, and that is why it mattered, that is why I will remember it long after I have forgotten the names of the streets I walked and the faces of the people I met. As I reach Jaffa Gate and pass through the ancient portal into the old city, as the stone walls rise around me and the sounds focus and intensify, as the smells of cooking and incense and humanity fill my nose and the uneven stones test my footing, I feel a surge of love for this place that makes no sense and every sense at once, this place that has broken hearts for millennia and healed them too, this place where three faiths plant their flags and claim their ground but where the ground belongs finally only to itself, to the limestone that was here before humans invented religion and will be here long after humans have moved on to other concerns. And I think of everyone who walked these stones before me, every pilgrim and every prophet, every king and every beggar, every believer and every skeptic, all of them searching for something, all of them hoping to find what they sought, some finding it and some not, but all of them marked by the effort, all of them changed by the journey even when the destination remained unclear. I am one more walker in an endless procession, one more seeker in a city built by seeking, and there is comfort in that, comfort in knowing I am not alone in my questions, comfort in knowing that the city has held these questions before and will hold them again, that Jerusalem specializes in the unanswerable, that it thrives on mystery the way other cities thrive on commerce or politics or art. The evening unfolds around me in its familiar rhythms, shops closing, families gathering for meals, the faithful moving toward their evening prayers, and I walk slowly, savoring every step, knowing that this city does not belong to me but that I belong to it now, that it has claimed me the way it claims everyone who truly sees it, who truly opens to what it offers. Tomorrow I will wake early one last time and walk to the Mount of Olives and watch the sun rise over the city and say my wordless goodbye to stones that will not remember me but which I will never forget. And then I will shoulder my pack and walk out through one of the gates and board a bus or a train or a plane and begin the long journey back to whatever passes for ordinary life, carrying with me the memory of silence, the gift of that one morning when Jerusalem stopped speaking and started listening, when the city that never sleeps woke to something deeper than sleep, when the stones that have absorbed so many prayers offered their own prayer in the form of perfect quiet. Before I end this sacred sharing, I want to invite you once more to subscribe if you haven't yet, to become part of this community that seeks beauty in silence and meaning in mystery, because every journey through these ancient streets opens new doors of understanding, and when you walk with us you remind me why these stories matter, why these moments of shared wonder are the threads that connect us across distance and difference, and together we will continue exploring the places where heaven touches earth, where the impossible becomes inevitable, and where silence teaches us how to hear again.